Here is a chisel effect achieved with two bevel and emboss layer effects. Below we have one layer to which we have applied a bevel and emboss using the emboss style. This creates a recessed version, and then above this, sitting in the recessed area, we have a second bevel and emboss applied with the inner bevel style. Both layers have a fill opacity set to 0. I'll come to the beginning version. Turn my fill opacity down to 0, double click to the right of the layer name, come to bevel and emboss. So all we will be seeing is the opacity of the layer styles themselves. So for this first layer I'm using an emboss, technique smooth, a depth of 100, size of 20, and then softening that by 3 pixels. The exact amounts that you use will depend upon the size of your image, your own personal taste, and the typeface that you're using if you're applying this effect to type. But importantly here, the bottom layer needs to be emboss. Let me also point out that for both the highlight and the shadow mode, I'm using a blending mode of overlay. This is going to be pretty subtle, and that's what I want. An overlay works in this context because my background texture image is quite grey. It's an almost neutral grey. In addition, I also want a drop shadow, a very subtle drop shadow just to give some more definition to the characters. Once again, I'm using the blend mode of overlay. Okay, now what I'm going to do is duplicate that layer, Command J. I'll throw away the drop shadow there because we don't want the drop shadow. I'll double click on the bevel and emboss and change its style to inner bevel. I also need to change the technique to chisel hard. We'll leave the depth the same as it is. I'm going to increase the size. This is going to come up to 47. Now these values are the values that I arrived at, but I didn't arrive at them immediately. There was a lot of trial and error involved. And I want to make sure that the angle and the altitude are respectively -160 and 26. And then I don't want any highlights here, so I'm going to take the highlight opacity all the way down, but I do want to make the shadows quite strong, so I'm going to change the blending mode to linear burn and increase the opacity to 50%. I'm also going to reduce the softening down to 0. And importantly here, I'm going to change the direction from up to down. I removed the drop shadow from this layer, but I do want an inner shadow. My inner shadow is going to have a blending mode of overlay, and I'm going to change its color from black to white. I'm going to increase the opacity to 64, increase the distance to 8 pixels, the choke to 41%, and the size to 29%. So let's see how these two layers work together. The inner bevel sitting inside the embossed bevel. Now to complete the effect, I would like to just roughen the edges of the letters, and I'm going to do that using a layer mask and a filter. I will command click on the type layer to load the type as a selection, and then come down to the bottom of the layers panel, turn that selection into a layer mask. With that layer mask selected, come to filter, filter gallery, and the one that I'm after is in the brush strokes group. Spatter, I'm going to use a spray radius of 3 and a smoothness of 5. And if we take a close look, we can see that that has now slightly roughened the edges of the letters. I will hide the layer mask and then turn it back on again. There's an important setting in our advanced layer options that is making that happen. This one, layer mask hides effects. We do not want that checked in this context. If it were checked, the layer mask would have no effect, but with it checked, the new shape of the layer is the shape to which the effects are now applied.